Hi, this is Kalpita and Vidya, and you are listening to Inspiring Table Talks.
We're super excited as it is our very first official podcast episode.
Exactly, and what better way than to begin with the topic of self love, especially in such an unprecedented time?
A woman of many hats, from corporate to the coaching space, she creates transformational spaces for women in the corporate world and is now an agent of change and really knows how to humanize workplace environments. She really is a walking, talking treasure and avid reader who reads at least 52 books a year. Today we have Safiyyah Boolay, CEO and founder of New Habits Coaching.
And we would like to welcome you, Safiyyah, and to all our listeners, we just want to say, please take note of Safiyyah, as she is definitely going to be one of our house guests on the podcast series, because there's just so much to talk about and learn from her and to implement in our lives. Welcome, Safiyyah.
Hi, how you doing?
We are happy to have you.
Thank you very much.
So, Safiyyah, I think this is a real honor for us to just have you here on our first podcast. And we are going through a very challenging time as the world would see it. So today we're hoping by the end of this, people can understand a bit more about self-love in terms of how it applies to your daily life and not just in a whimsical manner.
Yeah. I think it's very important that the very word that you use there, like in a word, is very important because we think about like self-love, self-compassion, and making space for our self-worth as something that we do in a whimsical way, and yet we forget that at the core of our entire world is ourselves. If we are not fully occupied by ourselves and the essence of who we are in fact being occupied by something that is alien to the essence of who we are. And unfortunately, because we are so busy and so distracted, the vast majority of us are quite literally occupied by alien forces. And when we actually encounter the core of ourselves or the essence of ourselves, it feels uncomfortable and it can even feel unwelcome and unnerving.
That's so true.
Yes,
that is so
most definitely true. So, Safiyyah, there are many definitions of self-love, but in a nutshell, how would you define it?
For me, in a nutshell, self-love is about being in a relationship and being in connection with yourself. Self-love to me is about knowing how to honor the best parts of you and knowing how to make space for the parts of you that is not a reflection of your best intention of yourself or for yourself. It's about making space for the parts of yourself that is still needing more care and more attention. We have a lot of judgment of ourselves. And in the process of having judgment, we create the sense that we're not enough. And when we create the sense that we're not enough, we create a relationship of, almost like shame of ourselves. The not enoughness shows up in so many different ways. And I think every single time we spend time with ourselves and we overcome a piece of that not enoughness, we've demonstrated compassion and love for ourselves. There's no right way and there's no wrong way to love ourselves, but it is about making more of ourselves welcome in our own lives.
And so on one of your Facebook posts, you shared something, and when you speak about the definition of self-love, I want to bring this quote in, and I'll tell you why. You said, you should love yourself so fiercely that others know exactly how it's done when they see you. How does loving yourself change your behavior towards each other?
When we are in a healthy relationship with ourselves, then we require that the relationships that we enter into are healthy relationships. We don't seem to realize it, and we don't do it consciously. But at a very subconscious level, when we are interacting with each other, we are subliminally contracting with each other. We are letting each other know what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. And when each and every single one of us starts becoming very clear about what is and what is not okay, what we will and what we will not allow, when we become very definitive about the boundaries that we hold, then the relationships that we are in will change. And sometimes the relationships will change in the sense that the nature of the relationship will change. And other times it will change in the sense that who you are in relationships with will change. Every single relationship you are in one way or the other, reflects an aspect of the relationship you are in with yourself. At the end of the day, each and every one of us is constantly teaching each and every other person we interact with how to treat us.
That's so true.
So if you want to have healthy relationships, if you want to have open communication, if you want to have clear boundaries, you're going to have to start doing that for yourself first. And almost automatically, the social landscape around you will change.
Interesting how you explained that. I also wanted to ask you about journaling, which I read on your website about. How does one keep themselves motivated to journal daily? Because lots of people tend to get lazy or bored of journaling. So how do we stay consistent with that?
I think it all comes down to where you prioritize the journaling and what the journaling means to you. If the journaling is something that you do because it's something you think you have to do, you ought to do, or you should do, then of course it's going to be problematic. It's not going to be something that you find rewarding and something that you find to be empowering you in your life. If however you understand that the journaling opportunity is about having and spending time with someone that is critically important in your life, then the journaling fills a very, very different role. Your journal is a space in which you decant your mind, you decant your experiences, you decant your emotions. You know, when we keep things bottled up inside of us, we tend to lose focus on what they're trying to communicate to us. And when you're journaling and you put it out and you're putting it out on paper, you're able to see it for what it is, you're able to see your thoughts for what they are, and you can start creating the kind of maybe distancing depending on the context, or the kind of healing in another context that you want in relation to your emotions. And obviously sometimes just the fact that the emotion was given the space, it loses its potency in your life. And one of the things that we tend to miss is that emotions need space to live and to breathe. And when we don't give it the space, by not giving ourselves the time to process our emotions, what ultimately happens is that they stay bottled up. And we must remember that emotion is energy in movement, right? And energy doesn't want to be suppressed. And when you suppress an emotion for long times, there comes a time when it wants to erupt. And unfortunately, it comes at a time that's perhaps not convenient or appropriate for you when those emotions erupt. So when you're journaling as a chore in and of itself has no real benefit. but journaling as part of the bigger picture of who you want to become and how you want to nurture yourself into becoming that version of yourself is a powerful instrument. So it's just one of many instruments. I'm very fond and I advocate journaling because it allows you to have a real conversation with yourself. But there are many different ways in which to have a conversation with yourself. So it depends on what your bigger intention is. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. It depends on what you want to create in your life.
We often think of journaling as something, it's almost as like it's become so trendy in all of these self-help books and courses that we do. But at the end of the day, are we doing it because it's something that we just want to do to fit in, or is it something that we're actually using as a self-reflection tool?
And so that is the entirety of, everything has a reason, everything has a purpose. And if the purpose of that thing is aligned with your bigger quest, your bigger quest, then you will find the space, you'll find the time, you'll find the energy. I think we've over-romanticized journaling in terms of it being fancy books and beautiful stationery and those kinds of things. We need to remember that journaling is just a way to have relationship with ourselves. And we can have relationship with ourselves on the cheapest of paper, on the plainest of paper. It's really about taking out of your mind things that are feeling stuffy and trapped, and getting to see it for what it is and getting to engage with it.
But also it will really impact the way people look at societies, the way societies function as a whole. And this impact is something I feel we need to focus more on if we really want to change how things are being done.
I agree with you. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Pema Chodron. She's a Buddhist nun. And I really agree with her contention that almost to a fault, the entirety of human suffering is because we are in such unhealthy relationships as human beings, that our understandings of things like power, our understandings of things like worth and compassion are completely distorted, because we are not coming to a place of healthy relationship with ourselves. And because we're in unhealthy relationships with ourselves, we radiate those relationships in our social circles. And if every single human being is doing that, then ultimately you have an entire humanity that is bearing the brunt of unhealthy relationships. And you know what? We think we can change relationships with other people, but we can't really. We can ask other people for certain things and we can ask them to show up in certain ways. But at the end, the only relationship that we can really and truly change is the relationship we have with ourselves.
Yeah, that's true. So Vidya and I were actually chatting earlier about self-confidence and how self-love and self-confidence ties in. Right, Vidya? And you were saying something about criticism.
Yes, so self-love with yourself, you can work on it and journal. But when it comes to other people, how do you deal with people that are constantly criticizing or putting you down? And these are people you probably deal with every day, because that in a sense affects your self-confidence and even your self-love. You can start doubting yourself or start hating yourself. So how do you keep up with still loving yourself through all of that?
So the answer I'm going to give you is a very difficult answer.
Okay.
The thing about self-love, self-care, self-confidence is that there's a path to achieving all of this that requires or might require, it doesn't always require, but it might require some discomfort. It might require us to make different choices. Now, when we are in relationships that are painful relationships or they create unwanted experiences, the question at the end of the day is, how are you showing up in that relationship? How are you contributing to that experience that you are experiencing? And, and in a generalized way, it can sound very simplistic, but each and every single situation has its own complexities. But my experience, and this is my experience through myself, my own life, as well as the clients that I work with, is that each person that triggers you is actually a person that is coming to you with a gift. And the gift that they're giving you is the opportunity to learn how to resolve those triggers and how to no longer be affected by the way in which they are showing up in the relationship with you. Sometimes it is about you becoming clearer about your boundaries and what you will allow and what you won't allow. And in that context, it's about learning how to advocate for yourself, learning how to convey your concerns. And that person triggering you the trigger is not going to go away until you learn how to resolve that situation. I know of many people who, for instance, in the job market, they're very unhappy in particular jobs because a boss or a colleague treats them in a particular way. And then they change jobs. And the very, very thing that they're trying to get away from, they discover and they find in the next job again. Why? Because the thing that they needed to grow out or the thing that they needed to resolve inside of themselves hasn't been resolved. And until those things are resolved, the problem tends not to go away, even though you change the surroundings. My experience is that the next person, we all show up, we all have our triggers. And the moment we are triggered, there is this choreography that plays out. And in the choreography, each and every single one of us has our own script. We have our own moves, and we just play it out very subconsciously, and we play it out very automatically. And the people around us have their own scripts, and they have their own choreography, and each and every single one of us learns how to dance inside of that choreography. But the moment one person changes the way they engage with their scripts, it requires that everybody else has to change the way they show up to the script or to the drama that is happening. Okay? And sometimes it's just it's about withholding your part that you play in that situation. And sometimes it's very soft, gentle action that you take, and other times it's aggressive action that you take in the sense that you leave the situation completely. But let's be realistic, we can't always leave the situation. And so we have to find the nuances that is appropriate for that situation with which to change the script and the choreography. But you can't be waiting for the next person to be changing, because it's not going to happen.
Yes, because we find that the anger, if there's anger involved, and if you yourself give anger, it just fuels the fire more.
Yes.
So, yeah.
It also comes back to boundaries that we place or we don't place. And again, it comes back to things like it's going to be a reflection of what you need to work on, whether you like it or you don't. And that's where the discomfort really comes in, is when you know what is there, but the discomfort comes in accepting and taking the ownership. And in fact, I've learned from you how to take back your power. Do I always do it? Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I get it right. But it was about saying, don't wait for the next person. You write the script, you make the decision, you make the move, and you keep that power within you, because that's where your power lies. And so while we think of self-love, like we said in the beginning, as something about fancy, like journaling and self-love. It's not about fancy books and fancy stationery. It's really about doing the work and willing to go into the mud just to come out and realize, oh, okay, that was what it was, but doesn't mean I need to be there.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, when you use words like self-love and personal power, we don't seem to think that it's something we have to work on. We don't realize that there is an entire journey that we have to embark on inside of ourselves to make our way to a place of greater self-love and greater personal power. And I think one of the things that is so fundamental or foundational about self-love is that because you go into a relationship with yourself, you become clearer on your boundaries. Not the boundaries that you think should be in place or ought to be in place or society says to you must be in place. It's the boundaries that work for you. And we tend not to know what our boundaries are, because if you are constantly walking around with the expectation that something is going to happen by somebody else doing something, then that says two things. It says, A, you don't have a clear hold on your power, your personal power, and B, it doesn't know what you are willing to stand for and what you are not willing to stand for. You don't know where your boundaries are. And in the absence of that clarity, you are like a leaf in the wind. You go wherever the breeze goes. Your emotions get taken. Your emotions are not anchored in a course of action that you've decided, in a path or a choice that you've decided for yourself. Somebody else has the remote control to you.
And of course, along the path, you're going to lose people at times, and you can't feel guilty for that, because it's not, if a relationship, like you said, is not serving you, then you need to let it go, so that you're no longer that little leaf in the wind, but you're a tree who stands in your roots.
Yeah. And for me, it's not always about announcing the fact that you are leaving a relationship. Sometimes that is appropriate, but at other times it's just really about saying, this is what works for me, and I don't go into environments or situations or relationships that doesn't work for me. And then you start choosing the path for yourself without making the next person wrong. And I think very often what happens is that we make the other person wrong, and then there is a defensiveness that comes up and they feel attacked. I do think that you can, if you are operating from the place of your personal power, clarity of your own intention, and clarity of who you want to be and how you want to show up, I think you are able to insulate yourself from many different situations without necessarily cutting ties in a very abrupt and aggressive way, and without hurting people needlessly.
That's true. That is very true. I think Vidya can also perhaps attest to this, but while we've been friends for about 10 years, it also sometimes takes the next person to call you out, because if you're not seeing it, but you have a healthy relationship with somebody who's close to you, they can also help you along the journey.
Yeah. I think it's so important that we get feedback from people on a regular basis, because each and every single one of us has a blind spot.
True.
And you need help to navigate your way out of your blind spots.
Yeah.
Yes. Safiyyah, can you recommend some books to our listeners to start? Where can they start reading about self-love and self-healing journey?
I think that there are so many books in the marketplace right now. I can recommend quite a few, but one that is really standing out for me in a big way is a book by a lady by the name of Good Morning, I Love You, by Shauna Shapiro. And it's a book that is really about an intersection of very different parts of, mindfulness, personal mastery, personal power. It's an intersection of the scientific world and an intersection of the metaphysical and the spiritual world and the Buddhist kind of practices. And so it is really one of those books that, when you've read that book, you feel like you've read the sum of a great many other personal development books. Yeah. And the reason why I like this book in particular is because while other personal development books talk about self-worth and self-confidence and self-esteem, this book talks about self-compassion. And I favor conversation around the concept of self-compassion because as much as self-worth and self-esteem and they are really and truly are important, they tend to be conditional, whereas compassion is unconditional. There is no performance required for compassion and self-compassion. And so it is quite a different book in that respect.
I think you do a lot of work with women in particular around this, not just on a personal space, but also on a professional base and in terms of taking into the workplace. But if you could sum up a little bit about your self-revolution program, what can your self-love revolution program, what can people really gain from this?
So for me, the self-love revolution program really comes down to it's a first aid I think of it as a first aid kit for your inner being, your inner essence. It's a place in which you have complete dominion. And in that place of dominion, you can give yourself the care and the comfort that you need in order to build a stronger, more productive relationship with yourself, a more energizing relationship with yourself. My experience in especially the world of work is that we are so conditioned to performing to different aspects of our lives that we've forgotten to just be. From the day we are born almost, we are charged with performing and doing certain things in a particular way, regulated ways, that we've forgotten who we are at essence. And the self-love revolution is just a mechanism to re-access parts of ourselves that have been forgotten. And it's about building a relationship with self that keeps us stronger and healthier. Because here's the other thing that we forget. We forget that as human beings, we are whole systems. We are not just our mind and we are not just our labor. We are also our spiritual selves. We are also our emotional selves. And if one part of the system is underserved, the entire system suffers. Very often there are illnesses that people are suffering and they are being treated for it for years and years and years. And when they start to pay attention to the emotional selves, when they start to pay attention to their spiritual selves, they find that the illnesses dissipate and sometimes vanish completely without treatment. Why? Because, your body keeps score of all the different things that is happening in your life. And if a part of you is in pain, your body is going to reflect that in some way. It's a notice to yourself. And if you don't pay attention, the pain will persist. So I myself was a severe migraine sufferer. And the moment I started to enter into this relationship with myself, my migraines have gone away. I can't remember when last I've had a headache. And do I exercise? Do I do anything specifically to keep the headaches at bay? No, I don't. I have an approach to my life in which the relationship I have with myself is at the epicenter. And from that relationship, I take care of the other parts of myself. So the self-love revolution is really about coming to a place where you're paying attention and giving space to all the parts of you.
Yeah, that's deep. I mean, like Vidya does a bit of holistic healing in terms of how the body and and the emotions are related.
Mm-hmm.
But when you hear stories, it makes you realize it's almost like testimony, right, Vidya? Like, people don't want to
Yes,
believe it, but they see it.
people don't realize the connection between their emotional health and physical health.
Yeah.
So you can try to heal yourself on the outside, but the root cause and the root of the problem is your emotions at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So there's that's the core of it.
Yeah.
And people, lots of people are not aware of this.
Yeah.
When I speak to my clients, they actually they're amazed with this information. So I think people need to become much more aware of the link.
Yeah. Absolutely.
How can people get in touch with you, Safiyyah?
So the best way to get in touch with me is probably on either Facebook or on my website. And on both my Facebook page as well as on the website, you can find me at New Habits. New Habits being new behaviors, New Habits with an S. And I also have a Facebook group called the Self-Love Revolution, where people can get hold of me in that group. And in the Self-Love Revolution, obviously, we talk about all things related to self-love.
You can also find us on Insta and on Anchor.
Yes, you can listen to us on Anchor, and you can follow us on Instagram at inspiring.tabletalks.
And if you would like to be a guest on our show, you can email us at contactkpv108@gmail.com.